A psychotherapist claims that when some people hear voices due to schizophrenia or other mental illnesses, they may actually be hearing voices from beyond. Dark and powerful energy parasites feeding off their fear. And then we take a look at the story of a young girl who has one weird night. Is it possible that a technical malfunction made her panic, or was she being visited by a lost and lonely soul? Today I'm good.
I know I'm freaked out. Actually, I'm a lot freaked out.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. Hope you guys are having a great day too. Hope you guys have some awesome plans for the weekend. I don't, because it's going to snow all weekend. I hate the snow. I hate it so much. So much. I'm just going to be in my house all weekend long. So the CIA will know where to find me. They're coming in with their assassin teams. It's like, listen, normally I do this whole Jason Bourne thing, jump out the window, do a little roll on the ground, get up, run away. But there's snow out there, so go ahead. How are we going to do this? You're going to stage my suicide by slitting my wrists? You're going to shoot me 3 times in the back of the head and call that a suicide? What are we doing, guys? I think they can get me. But someone who doesn't hate the snow, someone who actually appreciates all the beauties of the natural world around us, running into Dead Rabbit Radio Command. Everyone get on your feet and give it up for one of our legacy Patreon supporters. Dude, no. Woohoo, yeah, wee! Haha, yeah, he's running on and throwing snowballs at me. He's all, get him, CIA, get him. Ah! They're injecting me with some toxin. Well, you know, it's better than being caught out in the snow, honestly. Is they're injecting me with their poisonous cocktail. I go, hey, Mr. CIA, is this at least going to be a warm death? He's like, yeah, it's going to cause your blood to boil. I was like, okay, let's do it. Let's do it here. I'll help you find a vein. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Oh, wait, before we get started, I don't want to skip this. Let's take a look at our Fan Art Friday submission. This is from Amalia on the Patreon Discord. Take a look at that little guy. What? This little Dead Rabbit Radio. The little Dead Rabbit Radio man. That's awesome. She crocheted this. It's cool too, because like, you know how yarn or fuzz or whatever she used there, string, sometimes has like a little bit of fuzz. It looks like the eyes are bleeding. I don't think she meant to do that. Maybe she did, but it's awesome. She's like, I didn't mean to do that. She's tearing it apart. She's like, it must be perfect. No, that's fantastic, Amalia. That's really, really cool. So thanks for sending in that photo for Dead Rabbit Radio Fan Art Friday. Okay, dude, no, we got a lot of stuff to cover today, so let's go ahead and toss you the keys to the Jason Jalopy. Everyone climb on board this hunk of junk. As we leave behind Dead Rabbit Radio Command, dude, no, why don't you drive us all the way out to prison? And when we get there, the warden greets us. He knows we're coming. And he goes, hey, I heard you guys are doing a tour of the prison. Oh, that's fantastic. I'd love to show you my awesome collection of inmates. I have inmates from all around the world. It's quite the collection. So he's like taking us through the prison and he's showing us his favorite inmates. He goes, hey, this here is Jerry. Jerry loves to paint. And he's a pretty good painter. We're looking at his paintings and we walk on by. And then the warden goes, now look at this guy. This guy's name is Luke. And Luke, he's not much of a painter, but boy, can he sing. And the inmate goes, la, 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 and we're like clapping. Like, you've collected quite an assortment of convicts here. He's like, yeah, unfortunately, they committed brutal crimes to get here. Their victims are still screaming for relief. We're walking around the prison, he's showing us off all the inmates, but we're just kind of like, you know what, man? This is kind of boring. Like, we're kind of hoping for, I mean, it was okay, that guy was a pretty good singer, but we were kind of looking for, like, the insane inmates. Where's the inmates that eat people and wear their faces? And the warden goes, oh, I thought you would be impressed by my menagerie of human captives. But the warden goes, okay, fine. Let me take you down to the basement of the insane. So there's a little sign on the door. It says basement of the insane. You're like, oh, yeah, we didn't notice that sign earlier. We would have asked to go down here earlier. And he opens up a rickety wooden door. It's all spooky sounding. There's a deep staircase descending to the bowels of the prison. And the warden, he begins to wet himself. He goes, I won't go down there with you guys. It's too spooky. While you're going down there, here's some food. They haven't been fed in quite a while. And here's some soap and some water. They need to take a shower too. And he shuts the door behind us. And now we're in the deep, dank catacombs beneath the prison. We are with the insane convicts. We were walking through the darkness. He gave us one flashlight, and we're walking through this spooky basement. We hear the howls of 1,000 maniacs. Let me out! Let me out! I didn't do it! It was a mimic! A mimic! And we're walking, and there's another guy being like, oh, Johnny, please come back to life. Please come back to life. Johnny, is that you? And then we keep walking. You're like, okay, Jason, we get it. Can you get on with the story? I said there was 1,000 maniacs. I've only mentioned 2. Well, anyways, 999 maniacs later, we get to the last one. You're like drinking the bath water. You're so dehydrated. You're eating the soap. You're like, is there a way out of here? We're walking. I go, this is the last maniac down here. Number 1,000. We open the door, and we see this guy. He's kind of standing in the corner, and he keeps going, shut up! Shut up, get out of my head! Get out of my head! Wait, what? There's people behind me? And then we see the convict turn around, and he's looking at us, and he goes, I've been locked up for 20 years. I brutally murdered my family in their sleep with a rusty screwdriver. And you know why I did it? And we're like, no, we're making sure there's no rusty screwdrivers around. Luckily, there's only brand new ones. That's not his weapon of choice. No, why did you kill your family with a rusty screwdriver? And he goes, because the voices told me. They tell me all sorts of things. In fact, someone's listening to us right now. We're like, what? He goes, yes. Somewhere, right now, someone is wearing headphones, listening to me talk, but they're not here. I know what you're doing. I know what everyone's doing. Because the voices tell me everything. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at the story. This is funny because this is something we've talked about off and on over the show. And we even did a little bit at the beginning of the week. But this is the idea, as controversial as it is, I want to be very clear. I'm going to state what the idea is, and I'm going to state my opinion, and then we'll continue with the story. But this is the idea that when a schizophrenic person or someone who's suffering from mental illness hears voices, they're not hearing voices that are coming from within their own consciousness. What they're actually hearing is something else, something other outside of their consciousness. The voices are real, is this theory. Now, this is my opinion on it. I believe that whatever the case, mental illness should be handled medically first or in conjunction with other therapy. So I would never ever advise someone, if they were hearing voices, to only go to a spiritual leader. Like we said on a previous episode, if one of my loved ones was going through some sort of mental health crisis, if they were hearing voices, I would say the first concern is getting you into a safe area where you cannot harm yourself or others. That may be a mental institution. That may be under the watchful eye of trained specialists. And then, while we're in there or in conjunction with that treatment, let's look at a spiritual answer. Because I don't believe that it's always demons, but I think it could be sometimes. But even then, if you had a demonic attachment on you that was making you depressed, was making you hear voices, I would advocate for you to go see medical treatment and let us do the demon stuff on the side. Then we can bring in the minister. Then I can come and we can try to work on the spiritual side of this. But I'm just laying that totally out there. And I know that there will be people who disagree with me, and that's fine too. But I would never advocate for that. Here's the thing. I believe in demons. I believe in ghosts. And I believe in energy parasites or archons, as we're going to talk about. I believe in solar plexus clown gliders. I believe these entities exist. So I wanted to be clear about that, because what we're going to talk about is completely the opposite of what I just said. And we're going to take a look at, we're putting our conspiracy caps on for this. We're going to take a look at a psychotherapist named Jerry Marzinski. Now, we're going to do a brief overview of him. I will say he has countless podcast interviews, and he's written a book, multiple books. You can actually read about him if you want to do a deeper dive into his stuff. It's definitely a fascinating journey. We're just going to do a brief overview. Really what it came down to was Jerry Marzinski used to be a psychotherapist, a licensed psychotherapist, and he spent a lot of time working with people suffering from schizophrenia who were incarcerated, either in prison or in hospitals. And he would go in and he would talk to them. He would do therapy with them. After 40 years plus of working with people in mental distress, working with schizophrenia sufferers, he has hundreds of interviews with these patients, and he starts to notice some commonalities between them. One of the questions and this is a question that I think any psychotherapist or psychologist, psychiatrist would ask someone who hears voices, but you would ask about the voices. Who are they? What are they saying? What are they telling you to do? Are they good voices? Are they negative voices? And things like that. Pretty common questions. And what Jerry Marzinski would often hear is that the voices would tell the sufferers, the people who have this delusion, they'd say, the voices are telling me what to say. The voices are telling me what to say. Sometimes they're even telling me how to act. They can get very threatening. They can be terribly frightening, horrifying. These dark, controlling voices in my head, and I can't get them to stop. Jerry had a patient from California tell him this story once. We'll call this patient Joey. Joey was in California when he began hearing these voices, and they said, "Hey, Joey, guess what? I know you like the THC. I know you like the weed. What if I could show you a place where there's unlimited marijuana, more than you could ever carry?" Joey's already fully dressed. He's like, right when you said THC, I was ready to go. The voices say, there's a location up in Oregon. I want you to go there. It's pretty vague at first, but as Joey is headed up there, the voices are telling him specifically what roads to turn on, until he eventually ends up at a illegal weed farm in Oregon. Weed as far as the eye can see. And Joey just starts cutting it off the tops of these plants, taking as much as he can possibly carry. The voices then begin to tell Joey, "Hey, I know you got the weed and it's some good stuff, man. But what we would really like you to do is to sell this weed for profit so you can buy even stronger, harder drugs for you. The drugs you'll really enjoy." And the voices directed him to sell the weed, where to sell it, and where to get the drugs, where to get the hard drugs that he really wanted, or that the voices wanted him to have. The voices begin to tell Joey where to sell the weed. And Joey began to sell the weed and purchase these stronger, harder drugs, which Joey may have wanted to do anyways, but the voices definitely didn't have any problem with it. The voices also told Joey, never return to that farm. Never go back. Because they'll be waiting for you and they will kill you. So you go, okay, that's kind of cool. It's like a one-off story. Was he really being told by these voices that are outside of his head? Because obviously, if the voices are just in his head, how would they have known any of that? If it's all part of a mental illness and there's no outside influence, how would Joey have known about the illegal weed farm? How would he have known how to get there? All of this stuff, like specific directions. We talked about a story on Monday, kind of the same thing, about a man who had these voices telling him this mansion was waiting for him and there's keys for the mansion and it's his mansion because he's God. And this dude does end up wandering through town following these signs and eventually comes to a mansion and his name is on the mailbox at the mansion. And when he opened up the mailbox, there was a set of keys there. So you go, maybe it's just chance. Maybe just driving around town, you're going to stumble upon something if you interpret it something. And that's true. These could be one-off stories. But remember, Jerry Marzinski, he had hundreds of patients, and he began to kind of compare and contrast all of these notes. And he put this together. He says these are very common. It's not universal across the board, but you'll often find these things. The voices hate God and hate church. Could be a psychological thing. Church and God represent very rigid structures of thought, and it could be bad memories of church. These people who have schizophrenia when they were kids, it could be something like that. That could be something in your own brain. People who aren't crazy hate God and hate church. Doesn't necessarily mean it's outside voices. The voices, though, also hate the medicine that is given to the patient. And the voices hate the medicine because the medicine quiets them down. That's a little more interesting there, because if the voices are an outside agency and they want to control, of course they would hate the medicine because it's quieting them down. If it's just their voices in the head, maybe. Most of these voices were negative, a lot of negative talk these people are constantly hearing in their head. And the people who are suffering from hearing voices say that when the voices first come on, one thing they noticed previous to that is that now that they're hearing voices, they're also completely drained of energy. They don't have the vitality they had before the mental illness began. They're hearing these voices and they notice, I don't have as much energy as I used to. Might be a side effect of just being schizophrenic. Being mentally ill must, take a huge toll on the human body. Doesn't mean they are outside of the body. And Jerry is putting all this stuff together too. And he goes, I'm sure if I was insane, I wouldn't want to go out for a jog every morning. I just want to sit on the couch. But he begins to run this experiment. And he would ask the patient, he goes, I'm going to recite a psalm I want you to read this for me. And Jerry would have his patients read a chapter of the Bible in the book of Psalm. It's Psalm 23. I think most of us are familiar with this psalm just through osmosis, just through cultural osmosis, movie quotes and things like that. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And it goes on from there. He said, it's just, comforting, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Just comforting. But when he would have the patients read this, the patients would tell Jerry, No. They don't like this. They do not like this right now. Jerry's like, who doesn't like that? The voices in my head do not want me to continue reading this. I will not continue reading this. It's really making things difficult. When Jerry asks, like, in what way is it difficult? Are they like screaming? Like how are these voices reacting to it? The patient said over and over again. Again, this was 40 years of research. The patients would say the voices, it hurts them. It's hurting them when I read this psalm, which was described, I think it was a very visceral description. One of the patients said they were reacting like the way a worm would if it was on a hot plate. So if you had a heated up piece of metal and you threw a bunch of earthworms on it, and the way they're just wiggling around and freaking out and trying to get off, but they can't, everywhere they go is just hotter and hotter and hotter. That type of just visceral pain and agony, and you can't escape it. That's what these voices felt when you read Psalm 23. Now we're at the point where he is doing podcast interviews and writing books because he has a theory. And he goes, listen, when I started this whole thing, I was not a Christian. I wasn't religious by any standard. Nobody would claim that I was some sort of religious nut job. And even now, Jerry says, I'm a Christian now. He goes, but like, I don't run around preaching the Bible. I'm not a Bible thumper. I'm not trying to control people's morality. It's interesting because Jerry Marzinski, I mean, here's the thing. He has tons of interviews. He may have used this term once or twice. He may have used the word demon once or twice in those interviews, or maybe more. But what I read, he calls them energy parasites that is getting into these people's minds and telling them these horrible things about themselves, about the person who's suffering. I mean, we've covered a ton of stories about people hearing voices. We've done stories about how does a deaf person hear voices. A deaf schizophrenic, what they do is they hallucinate hands doing sign language in front of them. Or just a really evil / disappointed face. They'll hallucinate a face in front of them looking at them like they're the biggest loser on the planet. Think about that for a second. How insane that sounds. We understand if you're schizophrenic and you hear voices, but it's such a bizarre phenomenon that if you do not know what a human voice sounds like, the hallucination will still tell you you're worthless, you're a piece of garbage, you're nothing, but it'll use hallucinating hands doing out sign language in front of the deaf person. Like they'll hallucinate these hands moving. Or it'll just be a disappointed face floating there. It does seem that it's external in some of these cases. Again, medical treatment. Again, mental health specialists. But think about, sometimes we can look at illnesses like cancer and we almost feel like it's just evil. It's an evil disease or an evil malfunction, abnormal growth process. It has no agency, but it feels evil to us because sometimes it seems like it wants to go out of its way to kill the host. It feels evil because what we see it do to our loved ones. But this idea that even if you don't have the ability to hear, you will hallucinate hands telling you you should just kill yourself. They're doing the sign language saying kill yourself. It's like going out of its way to torment you. Now, it could be 100% medical, 100% psychological. I again say, treat it like that. But sometimes it just feels like it's going out of its way to ruin these people's lives and the people around them. He goes, I think they're energy parasites. When he tells his patients his theory, when he's talking to someone and he brings up energy parasites, the voices go crazy, for lack of a better word. The voices get so angry and just really start freaking out. really just losing it, as if they were being exposed for what they really are. But all of this stuff could be in their head. That's the thing. All of these things, if he had walked up and said, would the voices in your head like a whatchamacallit, they could have gone crazy. They could have been making all this same thing. He's just seeing commonalities between them. It could be that the person you're reading it to, the schizophrenic dude that you're reading the psalm to or having them read, they don't like the Bible. They don't like the Bible. They remember these past experiences that they've had with Christians and in churches, and they don't like the Bible. So the voices are reacting in a more exaggerated way than they would. They would just say, nah, I don't want to read that. But in this situation, they're reading it, and the voices are like, shut up, the Bible sucks, get rid of it, burn it, burn it, burn it. Because that's kind of what they're thinking. It's kind of like this mishmash. It's all in their head. Could all totally be chalked up to that. Even the hands doing the sign language. What's interesting, again, you got to test all this stuff, and Jerry's been doing this for decades. He started doing this test where he would be sitting there with a patient, and he would say, how do the voices sound now? How do the voices sound? He would give like a brief moment, couple moments, and then ask how the voices sound, and the person who's being treated, the patient, would say, they sound like they're muffled. It's like I don't hear them. I mean, like I can hear them, but it sounds like the voice is a little distorted, like there's something in between me and the voices. It sounds different. It definitely sounds different. What Jerry was doing in those cases was he was not telling the patient what he was doing. But Jerry would sit there and he would imagine that the voices in the patient's head, these energy parasites, as he would call them, would have their mouths duct taped shut and they were locked away in boxes. So he didn't tell the patient that. Jerry just imagined that. He imagined the voices getting bound and restrained and muffled. And while he was doing that, the patient would have a harder time hearing the voices. It sounded like they were being muffled in some way. This is an interesting story, an interesting theory. The issue is, one, the stakes are really high. That's why I kind of gave my preamble in the beginning. If you are wrong about this, Jerry, if you're wrong about this, then people are going to suffer, I believe, even more. Because if someone has schizophrenia and they're hearing these voices and they don't want to take the medicine, they don't even want to get medical treatment, and they come across this theory, I think it may make things worse for them. Because now they have this idea that these energy parasites are attached to them, and who knows what will come of that. Who knows how someone would react if they were suffering from this mental illness and believed this theory. That being said, I'm not going to shut down a guy just because it could be dangerous, because it might be dangerous. Although I do have to say, I think the likelihood is high. Jerry Marzinski is definitely, it's free country. He can say what he wants to say. I'm not going to say that he can't say these things. That wouldn't be fair, especially from a paranormal podcaster who does believe in things like this. But it's an interesting theory. It could be very, very harmful, sure. You also can't replicate it. That's another issue with this. But, talk about... But an interesting theory nonetheless. I really wanted to cover it for that reason. And like I said, if you're interested in learning more, he has a book. He's been on a ton of podcasts, very, very long podcasts explaining his research, explaining his conclusions. So if you want to look into that, all of that material is available for you. I just kind of wanted to do a overview of the Jerry Marzinski story. It is fascinating because I do believe that there are entities that can latch onto people, whether they are demonic or interdimensional. I don't know. I also often say that I think that demons could pick on people who already have underlying mental illness issues because they're easier targets. Not in the sense that they're dumber, not in the sense that they have lower spiritual defenses, but just in the sense that if people have already had a lot of experience with someone in their family suffering from mental illness, and they know all the signs to look for, and this has been going on for years and years on end, and then a demon attaches to that person, they could now be talking about not a delusion, a real demonic attack. And to the family members and to the medical community, they may just see it as another symptom of what's going on. So interesting theory. Again, I don't have any clean cut. I can't say it's all a fraud. I can't say it's 100% true. It might be a case-by-case basis, really. Some are and some aren't. But an interesting story nonetheless. Dude, no, let's go ahead and toss you the keys to the world-famous Carpenter Copter. We are leaving behind prison. Why don't you fly us all the way out to a little girl's house? Flying all the way out to this little girl's house. We're about to meet this young lady. We don't have her real name. We're going to call her Susan. This story, she said, happened to her when she was in middle school. So 6th, 8th grade, somewhere in there. One night, Susan is in her bedroom reading a book. She's reading Wuthering Heights. She goes, oh, Heathcliff's in it. He's my favorite cartoon cat. She's about halfway through the book and no one's eaten an entire garbage can full of sardines. She's like, what? When's Heathcliff show up? She's up and she's reading this book when all of a sudden... Sexy Sasquatch walking down the street. Sexy Sasquatch. I got a fetish for feet. Sexy Sasquatch. They and she looks over, me. Her radio is turned on all on its own. The way you don't But not only did it turn on, it turned on at full volume. Blurry. Sexy Sasquatch. Totally startles her, right? The world doesn't reading this know book. Sexy Sasquatch. Have a lot of fun about I want to suck your toes. Some woman falls off a cliff. Sasquatch. And then a man turns into a cat. Entire body she doesn't give much thought, though. She just shuts the radio off. But now it's a few hours in the middle of the night. Susan is fast asleep. Past couple of blocks, and those blisters form and pop in my socks. But these undead chumps want me to stop so they can pop my top, eat my brains and drink my blood like the Pabst Blue. She wakes up with a start. In the middle of the night, her radio turns on full volume. But now it's not just playing, it's quickly shifting through the channel.
We interrupt our regularly scheduled programming for a Channel 3.
Yo, my name is Enoch, and I'm from another epoch. I once went to space, and I parted with the Ewoks. It's shuffling through all of the possible. It's shuffling through all the radio stations at top volume. Definitely jarring in the middle of the night. At this point, Susan just reaches over and unplugs the radio. But this time it wasn't just a startling moment. It wasn't like it was just a few hours before when she was up reading and the radio turned on by itself. Something else was going on. Susan could feel something different in the air. The room's dead silent now. She starts to feel uneasy. She doesn't feel comfortable. She doesn't feel safe. And that is when she is overcome with the feeling that somebody is watching her. She looks around the dark bedroom, but she's all alone, but she can't shake the feeling that somebody is staring at her. She does what any kid would do in this situation. She hides under her covers. While she's hiding underneath her blankets, she begins to hear a noise. An unmistakable noise. What she's hearing is the sound of someone outside of her bedroom tapping on her window. She peeks her head out from underneath the blanket and she looks. I mean, that's pretty that's pretty ballsy. Susan peeks her head out from underneath the blanket to see what could be making this tapping, hoping that it's just a branch being pushed by the breeze. But what she sees instead is her window completely fogged over, except for one spot. There is a spot on this fogged up window that looks like a mouth print. So like someone fogged up the entire window and then just pressed their face right up against the glass, leaving a near perfect impression of their lips. At this point, Susan completely freaks out. I think any of us would. She jumps up out of bed. She runs out of her room to her big sister's room and begs her sister to let her sleep there tonight. A few days later, Susan is coming home from school and she sees a pretty sizable police presence outside her neighbor's house. She finds out that there has been a body found outside of the neighbor's house. A body found right over by Susan's bedroom window. Apparently, the neighbor had been up on a ladder with an axe and was using that to cut down a tree. Hold your questions till the end. Hold your questions till the end. You're like, what? Apparently, the neighbor was up on a ladder trying to cut down a tree with an axe when he lost his footing, fell off the ladder, and fell directly onto his axe. And he laid there for a few days before his son found his dead body back by the tree he was working on, back by Susan's window. Susan wraps up her story like this. She says, as a kid, I was convinced it was my neighbor's ghost warning me. As an adult, I tell myself it was a radio malfunction. This story was posted online by someone going by the name Welp, See You Later. And it's interesting because when I was reading it, there were a few details that I had a hard time kind of making sense of. When she said he was trying to chop down the tree on the ladder with an axe, on the one hand, you can't underestimate how poorly planned out people can do things. Like that sentence. I didn't plan it out. You can never estimate how, I don't want to use the word dumb, but you can never underestimate exactly how someone can fail to properly plan to do something dangerous. So it's possible he climbed up on a ladder with an axe to chop the tree down. I'm wondering if it's more like he was trying to chop down some branches. I mean, again, not a great thing with the axe because that requires you to, swing it. And ladders are notoriously unstable things. I know they're supposed to be stable, but they're not because people are constantly falling off of them. A chainsaw would have been better, but maybe he didn't have a chainsaw. Maybe he really needed to take care of something. Climbs up on the ladder. He's swinging this axe around. Axe falls on him. I had a coworker a long time ago who she had a chainsaw. She was up on the ladder working on a tree and she fell down and did not fall on the chainsaw, luckily enough, but did completely rearrange her face and did some major damage to her chest and one of her arms. She didn't hit the chainsaw at all. But hitting the ground the way she did. I think, when you're falling and a chainsaw's falling at the same time, usually you can brace yourself for an impact. Because she was maybe like 15 feet up. She wasn't that high. Normally you could brace yourself for an impact, but if you were falling and a chainsaw was falling next to you, your priority is not to like duck and roll or to swing onto your back and your priority is to not fall on the chainsaw, even if that means you fall on your wrist. All your body weight goes right into your wrist as your hand hits the ground. But yeah, she was messed up, and it messed her up mentally too. She was not the same person after that. She had a crippling fear of chainsaws. Other than that, everything was totally normal. No, she was pretty messed up after that. But the thing I was thinking, it's interesting, she said it was either a ghost warning her, and I didn't understand that logic. Warning her from seeing the sight, like if she had gone to the window and looked down, because obviously it was not visible, the body was not visible from her window, it was just nearby. Like, why was the radio turning on and off? Why was the window fogging up and the tapping on the glass? If anything, that's getting you to get up and look out the window to see if there's something out there. So she goes, it was either a ghost warning me, and she goes, nowadays I just think it's a radio malfunction, which is interesting because we talk about this on the show. Let's say that everything she told us is 100% accurate. None of it has been embellished over the years that this has happened. The radio malfunction would explain the radio malfunction. It wouldn't explain the glass fogging up. It wouldn't explain the tapping on the window, or the mouth print, or the dead man, or the dead man in the backyard. That's interesting, right? Because she had this, if this is not embellished in any sort of way, she had a paranormal event, and she goes, it was just a radio malfunction. The type of leaps of logic people will go through to give them the comfort that they do not live in a paranormal world always astounds me. Because she goes, just a radio malfunction, even though you had a host of paranormal events that followed the radio. That's hard for people to deal with. But what I thought was really interesting is when she posted this online, another person said, was it possible? Because she doesn't know exactly when the guy fell from the tree. I don't think it was in the middle of the night. But it could have been, right? Where she was reading at night. We don't know if that was 8. We don't know if that was 10 or 11. Someone said, I thought this was interesting, that the radio actually turned on the first time so she wouldn't hear the dying man outside of her window. This man who had fallen down, this father who had fallen off a ladder with an axe and lands on the axe, and he's drowning in his own blood. He's making all sorts of these horrifying noises that, you know, it will change you. Blood shooting out of his mouth, stuff like that, gasping for air, drowning in his own fluids. The radio turned on at that point to cover up that sound. That's an interesting theory. It would almost mean there would be a third-party presence here. You have Susan, you have the dying man, and then a third party trying to save her that memory. Very interesting theory. My theory when I read it was that he was still alive. He was still alive when all this was going on. The initial radio burst may have been when he originally hit the ground. And then a few hours later, laying out there, you know, if he's just bleeding out slowly or in and out of consciousness or what have you. When he finally dies, that's when the radio turns back on, and the fogging and the tapping on the window would basically be a confused ghost. The energy of him dying and the first accident, right? The energy of him hitting the ground and that shock and feeling that axe head go into your body, that could cause enough energy, enough psychic energy or ethereal energy to activate a radio to turn it on. Electronics turning on and off is very, very common in the world of ghosts and the paranormal. So much so that those have become tools that paranormal investigators use. And then when he did finally die, it's this confused spirit, and he's wandering around, and where does he go to? He goes to the closest place he can get. This window of his neighbor's house, and he's tapping on the window, and he's breathing on the window, and the window's fogging up. Or just even his energy is creating this condensation on the window and it's fogging up. But either way, there's this mouth. There's this mouth shape where he's trying to, you can imagine this now recently formed ghost tapping on the window. And then eventually he just assumedly vanishes. She didn't report any other paranormal experiences after that fact. It's possible the neighbor's house was haunted because of that. Which also, what's interesting is I get this question from time to time. What's the amount of time between someone dying and a ghost being seen? I get emailed that question quite often, actually. Generally, it's a period of time. It can be anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months. Sometimes, though, it's instant. We covered that story about the guy who, I think he shot himself. He killed himself in front of his girlfriend. And when the body hit the ground, the girlfriend looked and she saw his ghost standing there, looking down at his own body with this anguished look on his face. And then he vanished. And if I remember correctly, that's an older story. I'll put it in the show notes. If I remember correctly, she began to see him after that as well. So it can be instantaneous. I think those ghosts would probably be a lot harder to notice because in the chaos of an event like this, you wouldn't maybe not see it. You're such in shock. You just saw your dad fall off a ladder and get impaled by an axe. If the son was there, he may not notice that the ghost was in the bushes or something like that. You know, it's a terrifying story. It's a terrifying story because really it's a story of a man dying alone, which I personally have never had a problem with. I've never had a problem with dying alone, but I know that's something that a lot of people fear. For a lot of people, that's their greatest fear, is dying alone. It doesn't bug me. It doesn't bug me. I remember a long time ago I saw a movie. It was like a movie about King Tut. It might have had time travelers or something in it. But there was a pharaoh man who was getting killed, or like the advisor to the pharaoh, and he had been poisoned, but he was still alive, and they put him in this room, and the bad guy was walking around snuffing out the candles one by one, and the man couldn't move. He was still conscious, but he couldn't move, and the bad guy was giving this speech about dying alone in the darkness very slowly with no one there to comfort you, and he put out all the candles, and the bad guy walked out of the room, and then the scene just ended, and it was implied that this man died very slowly and painfully all by himself in a pitch black room. I remember I saw that when I was like 8 or 9. We were at a hotel. It was on television. And I go, that's not too bad, right? I mean, listen, I'm not aching to take poison myself, but that wasn't a fear of mine. And I know it's a fear of a lot of people. And that type of death, I think, would be one that the ghost could appear much quicker. There's just the fear. The fear and also a little bit of hope. Not in the Egyptian movie. That one guy's dead. But maybe he held out hope as his axe was in his body if it wasn't an instant death, if he was bleeding out but too weak to call out or anything like that. I mean, now I'm just making up stuff, right? I don't know if any of that stuff. But always having hope that someone might come rescue you, someone might hear you, someone might see you, someone might just have a feeling in their stomach. Something happened to Dad and they drive across town and find you. It's a mixture of hope and terror. As the night goes on, and this man's body gets colder and colder and colder, as his rich, warm blood is soaking into the soil, he's hoping that he is found. But each moment that he is not, he has this terrifying realization that he will die here tonight, all alone. But I don't know if that stuff's true. I know it's a super cheery way to end a Friday episode. But I think it's really creepy. And I love hearing other people's theories. That's what I thought was so cool. I read this and I go, oh, it's probably the ghost like trying to get attention. Imagine if you were lost and confused in a neighborhood and you kind of had a memory of being there. You know, you're a ghost. But you don't know you're a ghost, and you see a window. You don't even know whose window it is, maybe. And you walk up and you're tapping on it because you're cold and you're lost and you're scared and you don't know what's going on. You would walk up to a door of a house you've never seen and knock on the door and hoping that they'd let you in. Also, now that I think about it, it's interesting, too, was that I said there was no other paranormal activity in the house, as far as Susan said. We covered that story, I think it was last week, about that woman who saw a man in her backyard. And she went and she opened the door and there was no one in the backyard. And then she came back into the house and the man was at the window laughing. And ever since then, she had horrible luck. Not just like, oh no, I lost my car keys. Like, she was dealing with massive health problems. She was losing her mind because she let this spirit in unwittingly. She didn't know it was a ghost. She thought it was one of her boyfriend's buddies. So what would have happened if she had been curious, like many of us might be? You hear the tapping on the window and you see the fogged up glass and you think, oh, is this some sort of paranormal entity? And you open that window, what could have been invited into the bedroom, into Susan's life? But I love hearing, like, we take a simple story like this and I love hearing people's theories on it. I see them in the YouTube comments. And then even just reading about it, I had never even thought that the radio turning on at full blast was actually to protect her from hearing things that may have been very distressing to her. The sound of a man dying. Although if you think if he'd fallen right when the first radio turned on and it didn't turn on, maybe he could have gotten help earlier. But who knows? This is the thing. It's all about theories. And you can take a little simple ghost story like this, and I like how we can kind of extrapolate it and analyze it. I really, really do love that. That's one of my favorite parts about doing the show, honestly, is exploring the world of the paranormal with these seemingly small stories. And we're building this beautiful mosaic, all of us together, as part of the community of Dead Rabbit Radio. And we couldn't do without you. I love all of this. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.
We interrupt our regularly scheduled programming for a Channel 3 special report.
This is Daryl Kay reporting from downtown Sacramento. Unconfirmed reports are reaching us that a bomb has just been detonated in downtown Sacramento. We're reporting massive casualties in the vicinity of the downtown plaza. Fire and rescue personnel are on the scene trying to determine the extent of the damage. Right now, details are limited, but early reports point towards possible terrorism, a terrorist attack. It is unknown what type of weapon is used, but it may be a biological or chemical weapon attack. We will keep you informed as we learn more.
What did they just say? Al-Qaeda attack. There goes my whole day. I just dropped off my kid at the daycare center. Now downtown Sac is like the World Trade Center, but you should be safe and I could probably help out. Fired up the mud truck, arrived, and then I leapt out. It's a scene, man, you wouldn't believe. The bomb ripped a fucking crater from K to 15th, and the bodies were angled in various positions. Cops and sirens, firemen, and physicians struggled to treat them, but the body started eating them. This shit was fucked, so I jumped back in the truck, and then I crashed the truck cause I was going too fast. If I stayed here for too long, I knew I wouldn't last. Then a big fat zombie straight smashed the glass, and he's drooling. He wants a big bite of my ass. But you know I gotta have the last laugh. I reached out, snatched a hammer, stashed on the dash. I kept on swinging till the skull collapsed. I'll be fucked if my last breath is in his grasp. I kicked out the door, I counted 20, then 30 more. They pounced on people as they poured from the stores. They wanted me for their supper ingestion, but this brain won't be in their upper intestine. I grabbed the hammer and X-Acto knife, the walkie-talkie, and then I dashed for my life. I gotta get back to my daughter's daycare, but once I get her, where will we go from there in a dead world?
The city seems being overrun with man-eating creatures, and
what has happened though is that they have actually
reanimation will occur no later than 1 to 5 minutes after the victim's primary life functions have expired. Once reanimation has occurred, the subject will respond with immediate homicidal aggression.
And I'm running, and my veins pumping acid, and I'm running, and the gravel spits backwards. I'm running faster than I ever did. The cops barricade the lane from end to end. The cops, they open fire with their M16s, but that's not stopping the zombies from tearing people to smithereens. Shoot them in the head, it's a delicate lesson. Missed shot, your next stop is the delicatessen. The barricade is overrun in less than a second, and the cops become the victim of the spreading infection. I bust a left and keep headed for 2 blocks. I'm dripping sweat from my fucking neck to my tube socks. I see the daycare and it's engulfed in flames and rage. That running zombies with my hammer raised. And just above the brain of the Marilyn melee, I swear I hear the sound of Madeline's mayday.
Things are out of control down below. The city is like a war zone. These creatures, these zombies or whatever the hell they are swarming the city. People are dying in the streets by the thousands. And the freeways, right now the freeways are hopelessly clogged. There is no way out of the city. If you're hearing me, stay away. The city is out of control. The city is lost.
I grabbed Maddie by the hand and we're out in the flash. And her sunflower dress whips back as we dash. Yesterday I was worried about my rent and my job. Now I'm trying to outrun the judgment of God. Is this our fate? Out of luck, fucked, stuck in a dead world. Trapped in a dead world. Alive in a dead world. And pumping acid and we're running. And the gravel spits backwards and we're running. And our veins pumping acid and we're running.